ultimately, I think we're in an out-of-home measurement evolution. I always say when I'm doing any of the trainings is that, we've got new players that are in the market. We still have OMC, which is out-of-home measurement currency within the market focused on roadside. We have AllUnite is obviously operating in a lot of these environments that were previously not actually measured, and particularly not measured in this methodology. So I think we are on that evolution and that path, but ultimately, the dream is to have as much of out-of-home and all of out-of-home measured. Welcome back to the Beyond the Billboard podcast. Thank you for being with us today. And if you haven't yet, please follow and subscribe. As was mentioned in a previous episode, we are launching an out-of-home measurement series of episodes. And today is episode 2. We are very grateful to be hosting Rafe Usher-Harris, the commercial manager of AllUnite EMEA, as our guest today to talk about AllUnite, an out-of-home data provider that entered into the South African market in 2023. Today, we're going to be talking about their methodology, their coverage, and more. Raph, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Kirsty and Livia.
So I think to get us into the episode, I think for those that don't know who AllUnite is, it would be fantastic if you can give a short intro and summary about AllUnite and about your global footprint.
I think that's a really nice way to start. I think obviously the great story about AllUnite is we started, I think, back in 2018, really in the out-of-home. We started the company in 2013, but in terms of being in the out-of-home industry, it's really been a journey since that point. I think to give a bit of a background, Esben Elmo, our CEO, sort of came into the business looking at it from the perspective of e-commerce, which he had started a successful number of businesses in. And what we saw obviously within the e-commerce world is you obviously have a Google Ads sort of setup and basis in how you sort of work and function as well. So what he wanted to do and what Esben saw was the ability to bring like a disruption to the out-of-home industry. And that's what we did in 2018. And then we sort of kicked off in 2020. There was this small thing called the COVID pandemic, obviously, in between, which was obviously not the easiest start for the out-of-home industry and for a disruptor in that market, but we've had a lot of growth since then. Currently, we are in just over 40 countries globally, and we are the tender measurement in Brazil, Japan, Finland, soon to be Denmark as well, and the list goes on, also Malaysia. So it's a very exciting journey, and also South Africa is a big part of that story. Well.
When you say tender measurement, you're saying the being the out-of-home measurement currency for those markets, just to have clarification.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Wow,
so
that's amazing.
In general, I think Brazil was obviously, I think, our first win back in around 2021, 22. And from there, we've obviously expanded into other markets as well. I think it's always like getting that first project across the line, and that was very exciting for us. And I think the really exciting thing for us was the main point of AllUnite was that as a disruptor was the fact we were doing live audience measurement, and that's been the key part to our journey as well. And actually having a solution which can work in a huge range of environments.
I think that you've touched on so many things there that I want to build on. I want to ask you about the methodology, but I love that you've touched on kind of COVID and the pandemic came up, and the reason that I like that you brought that up, obviously a very difficult time for us as an industry and globally for everybody, but it's that during that time there was really this scramble around. I know, even on my side, to try and figure out how do we know where the audience is, what are they doing, how are they moving around. Suddenly this giant spotlight on this gap of what our current currency at that time had was around how do we know what's happening in not real time, but changing to the changes in traffic, the changes to numbers of people. All of those things became things that we were all speaking about. I remember checking Google Mobility in desperation. There was Google Mobility information that had come out that we were using that as a guide of, okay, we know that there are X amount of people in these areas or this percentage of people. We can try to see some movement, but it really started to get the wheel turning for me around, well, if we do need measurement that reacts to real world changes, where does that take us? How does that land? What are the options in that space? And I think around that time, you also start hearing AllUnite coming to markets, and specifically for the South African market, exploring those options. So yeah, I think it's a great kind of segue into us leading into understanding what is the methodology, how is the data put together. Can you talk us through what metrics AllUnite are able to provide from a measurement perspective?
Yeah, so I think actually you touched on a lot of really exciting parts of that. And I think one of the things we saw when we started off as well as, and what we've seen actually since, is the fact that you need to really provide that live measurement. And live measurement itself is exciting. There are obviously camera solutions out there, but also providing those hard metrics as well and methodology alongside it. And I think the core part, which I've seen, which has been a very important aspect to understand, is that live measurement builds, for example, the ability to see seasonality down. And we can, within our platform, go down to an hour basis, but also at the same time using a third-party data source. So what we actually do at AllUnite is we're using these Wi-Fi sensors, which we call the live data. This is our first-party data. It's privacy compliant. It works in every market globally, which I think is a huge benefit. But it also has the advantage that with third-party data, and we extrapolate that data from the Wi-Fi sensors, we can then get insights into demographics. We can build models which are cost-effective for a huge range of clients, but also through the metrics as well as that we're able to go into, for example, the impressions. We've talked obviously with clients in South Africa how important VAC is, and understanding that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You've obviously got that core metric and methodology, which has been structured, I think, back to the 1970s, obviously, with the studies and that we've seen, obviously, as well. But you also need to bring that into the 21st century. So it's getting the best of the past model and then bringing it forward into the future model as well. So we're future-proofing it while also retaining the core benefits of a sort of survey-based approach, and also a methodology which is universally accepted.
So you touched on the environments that you're able to offer measurement for environments that are non-roadside. And I really, really love that about your guys' offering, is that it kind of taps into the mall space, for example, where you usually rely on kind of foot count as your only form of measurement available. So I would love it if you could just unpack some of the other environments that you offer outside of roadside as well, because I think it'd be great for our audience to get an understanding of kind of which environments are also covered by your data.
I think, yeah, this is actually probably a very core big difference with a traditional sort of survey-based approach, is that we're not just covering roadside. We are covering the malls. We're actually within the South African market covering taxi tops as well, moving transport. Globally, we're covering buses. And we even had a media owner asking about covering sailing boats in the Philippines. So yeah, I would say watch the space. But yeah, we can basically measure everything. Elevators also we're doing in Brazil. So it's a very flexible technology and a very flexible methodology as well. And I think that also lends to that future proofing I was mentioning earlier, because what you can do as well is that we can expand that solution into different spaces. We can measure within like a transit space. If there is advertisement on the trains themselves, we can actually also measure the audiences within those trains. So you see that there's that flexibility, which I think an approach and a methodology which is live, but also using third party can bring to the table.
So we know that you can do different environments. You can do malls, you do transit spaces, you do taxi ranks here in South Africa. Obviously you can't do roadside. We spoke about that up front. But I'm wanting to just see, so you're able to pull out obviously reach. So through your Wi-Fi sensors, you're able to look at reach. Obviously, you can see your frequency, how many times people are obviously coming towards those sites or those advertisements or those out-of-home ads. And then third of all, you can also see dwell time. So you can also see how long people are actually either engaging with the ad or, placed within that area of the ad, which I think is also really, really interesting as a metric. Am I correct here?
Yeah, you are. So I think to sort of take it back as well. So at the core of the product, the Wi-Fi sensor, what we're capturing is an anonymized MAC address. But what's great about that anonymized MAC address, and I'm not going to go too detailed here, but we can actually track that anonymized MAC address in a privacy compliant way. So we can gain insight into frequency, the uniques as well. That's a big benefit of the approach in general. And I also think, which you were touching on about in the campaigns, is that we can actually do live campaign reports as well. So as a campaign is progressing, and what I've seen within the South African market is really exciting, you can see on a day-by-day basis, is that campaign actually hitting the metrics you want it to achieve? And you can also send to the client beforehand a campaign report which is based on that inventory as well. So we have the ability within the solution to actually provide for the media agencies and also for the clients themselves actual proof of plays. And then that builds transparency as well, because you can go in on, let's say, December the 31st, and we saw this at Copacabana Beach. I can also say down in Cape Town at the V&A, you can see that hour by hour granularity. So you can see at midnight, everybody's watching the fireworks. You can see that, and that builds trust. Or you can be in an office in central Joburg or down in Cape Town, and you can actually see that number of people around the sensor, and you can go and look on the dashboard, our dashboard, and go and say, okay, there's 35, 45 people around this location, and you can get out the window and you can go, that looks like it's pretty accurate from my understanding. So that's a big difference as well.
What I wanted to ask you now, and I think we are going to get into the reporting and dashboarding piece a little bit later, and I think there's something definitely important there around, performance-based reporting. But what I'm wanting to ask you now, and just to confirm, is there a differentiation in how your methodology works when it comes to digital out of home and static out of home? Is there any differentiation?
There is a differentiation in the sense that we're actually doing, and this is a big difference, obviously, for media owners when they start using our platform, is that we're doing that impression multiplier within the system itself. So it's an automated process. So within our inventory, we're also taking into account loop durations, number of slots. So we're doing that sort of groundwork as well for the client. So then when they're actually building the campaigns, they can choose the number of slots within that space, within that inventory, which they're using for that campaign. I also think the other thing which is important to mention is the benefit, obviously, of our setup with the third party and the Wi-Fi sensors. It's not every location has to have a sensor, which is very handy in a market, especially South Africa, where maybe your digital locations have a power source or a generator, but then obviously or static won't have a power source. So we can model that data accurately as well. And then we can also measure static in an accurate way.
Okay. And your current coverage in South Africa, is that mostly on digital out of home digital out of home formats, or have you also got static coverage and panels in your inventory that you're measuring now in our market?
So it's a mix. In general, at the moment, we are doing mostly outdoor. I understand it's mostly digital. It's limited, obviously. I think from our side, we're doing mainly indoor spaces. So for example, transit, malls are our main spaces, golf courses as well. Taxi tops, as I mentioned previously. But yeah, there's a huge range of environments and spaces we're working with our media owner clients in the South African market.
Yeah, thanks so much for outlining that landscape and also for discussing the difference between digital and static, because I think that it is kind of something that you need to go into the detail of. And I think as the market is becoming more familiar with measurement, and there's such a job to be done on measurement, on understanding the different options available. Hence the reason for this series that we've put together is that we actually want to shed light from an education perspective on what are the different options available. And I think for the agencies to understand when the information is shared with them from the media owners, if it says AllUnite, what does that mean? If it says OMC, what does that mean? It's important that people understand the difference between these different formats or different measurement types so that they understand what they're looking at. You've touched on some of the formats and environments that you guys have available in South Africa. If anyone's listening that wants to get in touch, what is the process in actually saying, okay, we'd like to be involved, what happens next? If you could just talk us through a bit of the process on that side.
I think in terms of spaces we're covering in South Africa, it's airports, it's malls, some of the roadside as well, golf courses, and yes, as I was mentioning, taxi tops. I think when it comes to how to move forward, I think the best way is probably you can reach out to me, and I think that would be the easiest way to go about that. When it comes to how to get started with AllUnite, which I think also leads into that conversation, we have different setups. So as I always say, we have the Suzuki option, it's reliable and small, and then we go to the Ferrari option as well. So we often have a product for everyone. We work on a sort of tiered basis as well with our project. And then also within the solution, we also are very pro getting POCs. We also look into different models to work with different clients as well, based on their needs and their resources or requirements as well.
While we're on the Suzuki and the Ferrari option, could you give us an idea from a cost perspective? And it doesn't need to be the exact cost, but for anyone listening who's wondering what might something like this cost them if they wanted to go maybe very basically. And also, is it charged per panel? Do you guys charge for kind of up to 10 sites? Or if you could just give a bit of information around how the pricing structure works. Again, obviously understanding that for purpose of the podcast, this is a general discussion about costs and not an actual cost estimate that you're going to be providing, but just a general guide for anyone who's listening. Sometimes it can be, even quite intimidating to reach out to specifically an international data partner to say kind of, what are your prices? Or the assumption is that is something that's only for the bigger media owners. So if you could give us a ballpark figure just to kind of have a figure in mind for some people who might be wanting to know.
For sure. So I think that's always a question. I also think as a European-based company, it's always the first question that people have. They always think we're going to be charging a lot, and often
Yes,
I think,
and we worry about the exchange rate. That's the biggest factor.
But yeah, I think the core thing is what we do is that we have this tiered basis as well. We work on a per screen basis, but for a proof of concept, we charge around 4,000 USD, and that's around 20 screens to get started. As we move forward, we have a volume pricing, so it does get a lot cheaper. So if you've got 200, it's going to get cheaper, but we're also taking into account your needs as well. So everything's like an add-on potentially. So we can start off on a very basic measurement. So in terms of a per screen basis, we can range from probably around 10 US dollars per screen.
You spoke about 20 screens plus. And what's interesting for me is that, a lot of the smaller media owners don't have, even 20, they've got below 20. So I think, it's good that you do have like these ad hoc type models where you can look at, depending on what their needs are specifically.
Prime Media Out of Home puts your brand front and center wherever your consumer lives, works, travels, and shops. From eye-catching billboards and digital screens to high-traffic taxi ranks, buzzing malls, and right inside the store, we connect you to your audience at every stage of their journey. Awareness, consideration, purchase, we're there. We don't just place your brand, we amplify it, elevate it, drive it forward, outdoor, rank, mall, in-store, nationwide. Prime Media Out of Home, powering brand presence across South Africa.
I just want to just change gears a bit because I'm putting on my agency hat now. I know we've been looking at things from a media owner perspective, but I'm putting on my agency hat now. And I wanted to just talk to you about, first of all, okay, let's talk about your performance-based reporting, which I think you touched on earlier on, which I think is fantastic, is that, clients are asking for, how did my campaign perform? And, when we look at fixed measurements, it tells us what we plan to achieve. And obviously with your data, you can look at historical data to see kind of what you plan to achieve when you're planning your campaign. But it's so great, when you can go back to your clients and say, well, this is actually the performance. This is how many people we reach. This is how long they were at your sites. This is how many times we reached them. This is the unique reach. These are your VACs, which as we would have spoken about in our previous episode, VACs are called visually adjusted contacts. It's a measurement metric in out of home. And it's so great for clients to see that because it's not just, we planned to reach, 100,000. It's actually, what did we reach? How did we perform as a medium? And clients are asking more and more for out of home to be able to provide that type of, rationale and post-campaign reporting. But then a step further is also like being able for clients to be able to, calculate their return on advertising spend. How much did they actually invest into out of home and how many people did they actually reach? And then obviously the next step of that would be attribution modeling, which I know a lot of media owners and clients at a global and a local level are working on. But I think it's fantastic to be able to have some form of data to go back and report back to your clients. Raph, are you seeing that as like one of your biggest differentiators as being a data provider in the markets that you're in from a global point of view, as well as here in South Africa?
I think in general, yes. So I think that's the core point, is the fact that you can, with fixed measurement, you're using a survey which is a year or 2 years old. I think often the approaches with the live data is what we find is at the beginning, obviously there's always suspicion. So you're often having to validate, and that's what a process that we go through as well. And I do think that performance based and being able to provide viewed impressions, which is based on those core metrics as well. So we're not creating our own methodology there. It's internationally accepted. What we find is that the media agencies over a period, and what we're already seeing in the South African market, is they're accepting it more and more. So there is that transparency. And if you can then build up that ability to, over a campaign, you can actually go in and say, there's X number of impressions on the digital screen, and that you're actually getting those insights during, let's say, a Christmas period or during a summer period, that you can actually see it. Or within South Africa, there are so many regional or core differences. So often when we're talking about going into, let's say, the transit at Park Station, there's a lot going on around there as well. So you've got different entrances, and that the fact we can see all this within the system builds confidence. But I also think where we've had the most excitement is actually in the Brazilian market. So in the Brazilian market, what we've done is actually it's actually the most advanced in this way. We've put the data, and it's been put by the media owners into DV360, and we're actually doing the live bidding as well on the programmatic journey as well. And that what we're seeing there is it's starting to eat into digital budgets. So out of home has actually gone from 5 to 15% of advertising budgets nationally. And I think that shows actually a better story than often if I say an increase of X amount, because that's obviously the core sort of metric, is that you're actually eating into that. And that can be on a local market as well.
I think that's out of home's overall objective, globally, locally. It's how can we increase the size and the portion of the out of home spend. And I think there's so many pieces to what Liv and I speak about in a lot of the episodes. One is like to manage clutter and fragmentation in the market, to make sure that, everybody's got their fundamentals, their basics, right. And everybody's doing high quality work, high quality proposals. And there's so many other parts of these principles of how we can make sure that we're driving that increased portion of spend, and how we can, not lose our spend to the digital media, space. One of the biggest pieces is obviously measurement, and being able to rationale, planned measurement, what you're looking to achieve, building that into your strategies, building that into your planning, but then also obviously from a post-campaign reporting point of view, which is what we're talking about now. And that really, really helps us look as an industry, obviously increase the portion of spend. So always exciting to have, data providers in the market. I know AllUnite, you guys are doing such a great job in a lot of the environments that you were mentioning, the mall space, the airport space, the transit spaces here in the market. What I also wanted to ask you about now is with regards to your dashboard, like from an agency point of view, do agencies or clients direct have access to the dashboards, or is that something that's only utilized by the media owners from a planning point of view, reporting point of view to their agencies or their clients?
So I think the first point to start on with that is that at its core, and I think this is also important for the audience probably to hear, is that the data within the system from AllUnite is their own data as well. So they decide what they want to do with that data. It's very possible for us to share, obviously, with the media agencies. There's different setups globally, actually. So media agencies can go in and look at the measurements in their own campaigns, so we can build that into our dashboard and solution. But there are often different ways that different markets work. So some markets, what I've seen is often the agencies going in and actually planning the campaigns as well. So there are those different setups, and we have a solution which is flexible enough to basically suit individual needs actually on that side.
As we head towards our close, I wanted to ask you something. You touched on the Brazilian market and how they had managed to kind of, through the use of your data and methodology, actually move the needle from an out-of-home investment perspective. And as Kirsty mentioned, I think that, one of the major questions around out-of-home is how do we get more media spend to the channel? And often that is so closely linked to measurement, is that the clients, the CFOs, the CMOs, everybody's asking, how do we know it works? How many people are we reaching? How many people are we actually reaching? What about the environments that are not measured? How do we answer that? So I love that your guys' offering has kind of ticked all those boxes in those space. But I wanted to ask you, you obviously also sit from an EMEA perspective. You've got a lens across the region. How how would you advise, or what advice do you have for the South African market of where we're currently at? You obviously have got some media owners already working with you guys, some agencies working with you guys. How would you advise us on moving the needle forward to start seeing some of those gains on, budget from some of the other channels, or seeing the growth that you've seen in a market like Brazil? What advice do you have for us as, we're quite an advanced market from a measurement perspective. It's not new to us. There are different methodology partners that are popping up that might be newer to the market, but we're not in our infancy, but we're not fully advanced either yet. I think that we're on a great journey in that space. But yeah, I would love to hear any advice or suggestions on how we can be setting ourselves up for success, and also looking for those opportunities to make those gains, like you've seen in some of the other markets.
Yeah, I actually loved how you phrased that, obviously from the EMEA chair, because often I feel that there's this perspective that EMEA is often leading. And I think that's actually wrong in general, because actually what I see with the South African markets, I'm also talking right now with Nigeria, is these markets are more innovative often than the European markets. I do think that there are lessons often from the other markets. I think something which is important from our side, and this is going to be important in any market, is the fact within South Africa is we don't want to lead to fragmentation. So we are mindful of that, working within the metrics. We have communication with the OMC. We are working in a way which is collaborative and ensuring those measurements all align, because the problem often we see is when you start getting fragmentation, it creates confusion. And at the core point, I think within any, whether it's a media owner or media agency, it benefits no one. So we often are trying to work within that landscape and ensuring that we move forward in that way. That's not to say there aren't differences between our measurements and approaches. I think within the South African market, I think the ability to get more data is really exciting with the third-party options. And that's what we're actually doing with free Wi-Fi now, actually in Brazil. And I really would love to see that in South Africa. And I hope we will in the coming 2 quarters or by the end of the year, because you have such an exciting space, whether it's in the townships, whether it's in malls, and free Wi-Fi would be amazing. Also in rural areas, because there's such a limit of data and information. If you start going into up in Northern Cape, there isn't that much data up there as well. So we can actually, through this free Wi-Fi, which we've done, and we've done it in Brazil, is what you can do is then you can get demographic data through consent-based login. And we can also provide, for example, consumer surveys on a live basis. And in a very short time, I think in Brazil, we did it in 22 transit locations. We got 200,000 responses in about 100 days. So it's huge. When it comes to the media agencies, I think it's building the transparency of the data is going to build trust. And I think it's not going to happen overnight. It never happens overnight. But what we're seeing in Brazil after 3 years is that we're actually getting a very solid response, and that collaboration is taking place between the media owners, the media agencies. The data is being accepted as well. I've had conversations within the South African market on the media agency side. There is a lot of positivity. There's a lot of excitement about it. But often at the end of the day, I think it's about expanding our coverage as well, so they can start seeing it in more and more spaces as well. So that's the long answer, but I think the short answer is that it's basically to keep modernizing the industry. We need to keep future-proofing. We need to keep being exciting, and that's what we're doing.
I love that you've touched on fragmentation, and kind of just as a clothing thought from my side, I wanted to share that, we've got the OMC in our market. We understand the methodology. We understand the positioning. And I love that you've mentioned the fragmentation, in that if you've got 20 different measurement partners, that doesn't necessarily benefit the industry either. And I think it's around how do we collaborate or come together to see how do we make something that is more uniform, because that is easier to understand. The harder that out of home is to engage with from an agency perspective, from a client perspective, it's a barrier to entry that you could have 50 different measurement types. That wouldn't make it easier for a client to book out of home. And then that kind of is where we sit in the situation where we're stuck with how we're retaining extra budgets or getting extra budgets from other media channels, but we can't seem to get our own house in order if there's too much measurement options available. And what I also love about your guys' offering is that you're aligned from a VAC perspective. So I think as an industry, we've come on a journey and understanding what is a VAC, why is a VAC, where does it come from? I don't think there are any questions around why we're doing this anymore. Everybody has accepted that there is this VAC methodology that is global best practice. And I love that although your offering is different to the OMC, it still goes down to VAC level, so that when you're sitting in your agency seat and you're busy with your schedule and you need to report on measurement for every single line on that schedule, you can put the VAC in, and that starts to make things a lot more uniform. And like you said, moving away from this market fragmentation. So I just wanted to share that as my kind of final thought for the episode.
Completely agree. So I think from my side, I think that we need to actually work together, and that's why I think it is important from a measurement perspective in every market to have that collaboration. I think there is often space for multiple audience measurement providers, but it does need to be following the same, for example, methodology and structure, because as you're stating, it does add that confusion. And I do think the one thing which goes back to the beginning of what I said, as well as the AllUnite, we are able to cover spaces which the current model for roadside is unable to cover. So that's what I think is a huge benefit as well.
I think we need to remove the tensions when it comes to out of home as a medium, and when agencies and clients are wanting to book the medium, report on the medium, that we need to remove as many of those frustrations and tensions, because that will ultimately help us get onto more schedules and help us to obviously increase spend to the medium. And I agree with the pieces that both of you have mentioned today. I think that all out of home in South Africa needs to ultimately be measured, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And ultimately, I think we're in an out of home measurement evolution. I always say when I'm doing any of the trainings, is that, we've got new players that are in the market. We still have OMC, which is out of home measurement currency within the market focused on roadside. We have AllUnite that's obviously operating in a lot of these environments that were previously not actually measured, and particularly not measured in this methodology. So I think we are on that evolution and that path, but ultimately, the dream is to have as much of out of home and all of out of home measured. Raph, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic to have you on this episode. We're just super grateful to have had you here to talk all about AllUnite, what your global footprint is, what your methodology is, what your coverage in South Africa is, and just sharing your expert opinion, obviously sitting in an EMEA seat. And we're very, very happy to have had you with us.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today to go beyond the billboard. Subscribe to our podcast to ensure you don't miss out on our exciting content.
Join us again to go beyond the billboard.
1, 2.